Hey y'all, it's Blake. I'm the Highlander hipster. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm getting back in the saddle to share a deck I've been riding with to great success. It's also a recent winner of the Commandy for our favorite commander of 2024. Let's talk about Wylie Duke Atten Hero. Wylie Duke Atten Hero is 1 green and a white for a 4/2 human ranger with vigilance. Whenever Wylie Duke Atten Hero becomes tapped, you gain a life and draw a card. So Wylie wants us to tap it, which it can't do by itself. If we do, we get card advantage and a bump in life. Pretty simple, right? Well, sometimes the simplest cards are the most interesting. They give many, many levers to pull to construct whatever deck you find interesting. For the deck I decided to build, I had my eye on a particular alt-win condition for a while that this seems like a perfect fit for. Let's talk about Halo Fountain. Halo Fountain is 2 and a white for an artifact. Pay 1, tap, untap a tapped creature you control, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. White white tap, untap 2 tapped creatures you control, draw a card. Tap 5 white and tap the Halo Fountain, untap 15 tapped creatures you control, you win the game. Having tapped creatures is normally quite hard to do, especially on the scale required to win the game. Since Wylie is already asking us to tap creatures in different ways besides combat, it gave me a good opportunity to have a look around and see which options could help us achieve this feat. The first thing that came to mind were vehicles. Vehicles allow you to tap any number of creatures at any time in order to turn them into creatures. This makes having our whole board of creatures tapped at will trivial. I have settled on 8 vehicles for the purposes of redundancy. All of these help fulfill roles that all decks need: ramp, card advantage, interaction, and synergy with our win conditions. Let's break down which of these fall into what categories. First up, Cultivator's Caravan is pretty simple and efficient mana rock, but nonetheless is necessary for critical mass, and it helps us with our highly demanding colored mana cost for Halo Fountain and other spells. Reckoner Bankbuster is a good mana dump when we need things to do, which is rare because, spoiler, this deck draws a ridiculous amount of cards, while Smuggler's Copter lets us filter all those cards into what we really need. Not Ship and Unlicensed Hearse provide invaluable graveyard hate that every deck needs, making all those stupid graveyard value players, that definitely aren't me, miserable. Not to mention they can be pretty annoying threats on their own. Sky Sovereign Council Flagship gives us continual crowd control for pesky utility creatures and planeswalkers. Being a repeatable lightning bolt on entry and attack, this thing hits like a boat, I guess. Asika's Chariot and Thunderhawk Gunship help us get our creature count up to Halo Fountain numbers. They also have pretty impactful combat effects that certainly aren't to be discounted. Vehicles weren't the only outlet I found compelling to tap my creatures. There are a number of support cards that can help produce mana that range quite a bit in terms of scale. Enduring Vitality turns all our creatures into mana dorks and is fairly resilient to board wipes, which this deck is naturally soft to. A very significant upgrade over crewing for the creatures that don't have summoning sickness. Another all-star from the Commandees. Similarly, Catilda makes our humans mana dorks, which we have a pretty significant number of, including our commander, most importantly. Elven Chorus and Dazzling Theater allow all of our creatures to be mana dorks for other creatures. Despite these being limited in their usage, the majority of our spells are creatures, so we won't have any issues with using these effectively, both having extra upside to boot. Elven Chorus helps give us card advantage from its future side effect. Prop Room helps continually untap our creatures to make our engine even more ridiculous, which will be a very important aspect we'll touch on later. On a smaller scale, Nature's Chosen and Springleaf Drum allow us to tap our commander for mana, and Nature's Chosen even gives us an untap once on our turn to spot us an extra mana and a card. Now, Wylie can't be the only thing we want to tap if we want to make this synergy actually effective and not extremely fragile, especially if we have aspirations to making it to Halo Fountain's 15 creatures. There are pretty slim effects to kind of benefit this payoff. We only had 2 previously, but now we've moved up to 6. So I think that's a pretty big win. These cards fall under the same categories as vehicles in terms of what every deck needs. House Cartographer helps us hit our much needed land drops, while Rip impulses for creatures and vehicles, and grabs whatever we find. These 2 really help with consistency if our commander is having a hard time staying around. Kona offers us mana advantage by giving us a free thing. It's not nearly as impactful in this deck as others, as our curve is pretty low and we don't have any interesting clunky big idiots. It's appreciated nonetheless just getting 3 or 4 mana's worth of stuff into play. It really smooths out our game plan. And hey, we have a few 5 and 6 drops in the deck, so there's potentially big game there. Defiant Survivor helps us move towards our win condition by increasing our board size, albeit about as fast as the Postal Service delivers my card orders. On the other end, we have Amara and Stony Brook Schoolmaster. Both achieve this role at quite the expedited rate since they work whenever they are tapped and not just on our second main phase. With the help of some untap effects, you can really bring all the boys to the yard. Untappers are quite a bit down the line in order of operations in terms of what this deck needs to function. They are the biggest factor in terms of making this deck spiral out of control for your opponents. The most effective are the ones that untap all your creatures each turn. They allow us to chain off card draw every turn and offer amazing utility. Drumbeller does exactly that while being a very tutorable body. Seedborn Muse needs no introduction here. It'll have your whole board state moving back and forth like it's tripping balls at a local rave. While Quest for Renewal is often the wannabe Seedborn Muse at home delivered to you straight from Temu, most decks struggle to turn this on in a reasonable fashion, and have a hard time making it work in the time frame needed to make it effective. This deck is a perfect home for it, and is trivial to get online. Next on the totem pole are the Untappers every turn, but only for one creature. They will still allow us to have an Insano card draw from Wylie, but don't quite offer as much utility. White Plume Adventure helps us hit our critical mass of creature quantity while replacing itself on entering with the initiative. Sting has a lot of irrelevant text for us, but it has the all-important untap every combat, which is surprisingly useful having the untapping on a different phase than the others, meaning you can stack up card draw for days. The last of our untapping suite are one-off effects. Benefactor's Drought gives you the opportunity to surprise untap your whole board while replacing itself. It could potentially be a political tool to offer some of your opponent's extra blockers. Sarenth and Seeker of Skybreak are pretty special. These two fairly tamed creatures turn your draw an extra card once a turn cycle into double dipping on every turn with any of the untap your whole board effects. I wouldn't run much more of this effect in this deck. However, these two have the effectiveness of a win more effect that cascade out of control when they work, but unlike the win more cards, these always work. Sarenth also protects your whole board from removal at will. I don't really need to explain why that's great. For Legolas's quick reflexes, we are actually using every part of the buffalo. With the other effects I have laid out, you can see how this card can be a Swiss Army knife, machine gun, card draw monster that can't be interacted with. This deck will actually make this card feel like it's $20. So as a quick recap, your order of operations for the engine we're putting together: something that gives us card advantage when being tapped, then something to tap them, then something to untap them. Once you have a bit of each of these going on, you can prioritize whichever feels like the weakest link. With all these puzzle pieces we want to put together, tutors are a very useful toolboxy aspect of this deck. None of these tutors are game breaking and can't get you anything at any point. They aren't required by any means, as this deck will see a lot of cards naturally, but since we are trying to achieve an alt win con, I think it's acceptable. Plus I kept it to a tasteful amount. If you're very against tutors, I understand. This deck can certainly still work for you. I have a selection of notable exclusions at the end of the deck tech that you can use as replacements if you so desire. The deck has been constructed so that these tutors give you access to whatever part of our engine you need. Things to help us tap our creatures, things to help us untap our creatures, or card advantage. El Domri's Call is the most generic for sure. It's only 2 mana and just gets you whatever creature you need. It's obviously very efficient. Incense is cut from the same cloth. Efficient, but you can't get as many things. Still can fit whatever you're missing. Core doubles as a way to tap creatures and use them for mana. The instant speed here is also crucial. Finale of Devastation can be a less efficient Green Suns, a reanimate spell, or a very powerful overrun. Our deck goes wide as you can see, so it certainly can end a game in a pinch. Enlightened Tutor is probably the most important, as it's the only tutor that gives us access to Halo Fountain immediately, while still being able to grab the puzzle pieces we need if you aren't ready for it yet. Recruiter of the Guard is for sure the most narrow tutor in the deck, but being stapled to a creature is pretty useful to add to our density. I'll emphasize again, this deck is carefully constructed to make these tutors act as a toolbox card to help you fill in whatever part of your engine you're missing. The more changes you make to this deck without the suite of tutors in mind, the worse you make these tutors. If you do make changes to the list, I would start with these tutors. They are very useful, but they're also the easiest to destabilize. Alright, those are the parts that need the most explaining. Now that we have our foundational cards, let's get the rest that we need to make this thing get groovin'. Let's look at the ramp package. Our ramp is heavily creature based. It synergizes best with the rest of our strategy. Mana Dorks pair very nicely with our untappers to allow us to leave up interaction when we need to. Fanatic of Ronus is really a highlight here. We don't have many medium-large idiots, but Wylie happens to just so have 4 power, a really nasty boost to your resources. Sure, it doesn't help pay for Halo Fountain, but we have plenty of things to use this ridiculous amount of mana on. Next up, supporting card draw. It's about what you'd expect. Creature-based card draw, Enduring Vitality, and Decaysia's Welcome fit our low to the ground creature-based deck perfectly. We will rarely not have things to do, so the less mana we spend, the better. Once per turn triggers aren't really a deal breaker for us, as we can reliably make tokens on our opponent's turns to keep these things triggering. Well Rested is a really cute card in this deck that can draw you stupid amounts of cards, make Wylie grow out of control, and allow you to health tank whatever your opponents send at you. Lastly, Sylvan Library is a good, efficient card draw engine. You would be surprised at the large amount of life Wylie can gain you throughout the course of a game. You'll never feel more comfortable taking 8. This wouldn't be a Blake deck without more interaction. For removal, you guessed it, it's creature based as much as possible. Luckily with today's environment, most effects come staple to creatures. We do get a few free rolls in the forms of MDFCs that synergize well with the deck. Swords to Plowshares is just damn efficient, and most of our removal doesn't hit creatures. Board protection is very important for this deck, and with all the options we have now, we can even find some with synergy. Clever Concealment not only protects whatever portion of our board we need protecting, it also allows us to tap our creatures, which we want to do, in order to make it free, an absolute slam dunk. Flare of Fortitude and Flawless Maneuver are essentially always free, allowing us to creature storm off without many worries. If either of these aren't free, they probably weren't worth casting at that time anyway. Teferi's Protection is pretty self-explanatory as the best board protection, life total protection, baby mama Actually, I don't have time to get into that right now. It's really fucking good. Mother of Ruins pairs really nicely with our untappers to keep her online every turn. We do have an abundance of protection in this deck, but I find it to be all necessary. Building up to 15 creatures can take quite a bit of time. Any bumps in the road along the way make it take that much longer. We only have one Halo Fountain because, well, them's the rules. So having a Recursion package is pretty important, even though we generally have a lot of redundancy in our deck otherwise. Cosmic Rebirth, Eternal Witness, and Savine's Reclamation. You really don't want to expose your Halo Fountain to removal until you're really ready to do your thing. That being said, Magic the Gathering happens. Maybe it gets milled from an opponent's effect, discarded, or some other unlucky thing that would never happen to me. That's where these rectangles come in. That being said, I picked really generically useful options, so you can fire them off whenever you need to in the middle of the game if you need something back. The mana base consists of a lot of fixing lands, since our color requirements are so demanding. Even some options I wouldn't normally consider make the cut here. Plus I want to make up for the few utility colorless lands I find necessary. Another reason for so many duels is that we are a Field of the Dead deck, so it's very useful if you can get your hands on as many on-color fetch lands as possible, and not that Evolving Wilds garbage. We really need these lands to enter untapped as much as possible. Field of the Dead is certainly one of the most powerful utility lands in the format that helps feed our engine by hitting critical mass of tokens. Even only triggering this thing just from your land per turn, once a turn, still takes a lot of stress off hitting Halo Fountain numbers. I didn't find it necessary to run tutors to get Field of the Dead, since most of the other synergistic utility lands are more for desperation purposes. Holdout Settlement, Survivor's Encampment, and the Shire help us tap Wylie Duke or another value creature if we really need the help. I have played this deck many times, and I've only had to use these a couple of times luckily. I still think they're important and worth the include for when things really aren't going your way, but you know, Magic the Gathering happens, so sometimes you gotta use these. Buried Ruin falls into the same category. Sometimes you really need your vehicle or Halo Fountain back, so despite the colorless lane being quite painful, it's worth it. I don't need to convince you that Boseiju and Gaia's Cradle are busted. If you don't want to run these for power level reasons, or you don't have them and you're really against proxies, that's fine. Just a slap a forest in their place and it'll be okay. Now when adding that forest, it's very important that you remember that Field of the Dead is in your deck, and you want to split your basics between snow covered and regular basics, so that way you can maximize the number of different land names you have. I'm on 11 basics currently and don't think it would be a good idea to go below that amount. Alright, let's go over some reasonable includes if you want to try something a little different or replace the tutors. All of these were cards that were at one point in the deck and were cut due to ineffectiveness. Their roles just were filled better from other cards currently in the list. First up for some tappers, Paradise Mental and Jaspara Sentinel. Both help get your engine going and seem to be run in most Wylie Duke decks according to EDHREC. The deck just has so many tools to tap more creatures at will, with the scale of these is just not impressive. Granted, Paradise Mantle can sort of move down the chain of creatures by using the mana it generates to attach to the next creature. Problem is Summoning Sickness stops you dead in your tracks. It looks like all the cards similar to just Jaspara Sentinel usually make the cut. The problem is that these get much worse in multiples, and it also has the summoning sick problem. That being said, I was much happier with this elf than the mantle, as having one of them in your deck is really nice for the purposes of finding it off Green Suns, or for a lesser extent, Finale and Recruiter. Enduring Vitality was the nail in the coffin. With it in Cantilda, I find that to be sufficient density for tutoring purposes. Next, the Untappers. To Arms, Mobile Garrison, and Instill Energy. They all look very similar to cards that are in the deck. However, their elder siblings all have the slight edges to push them out. Even the cards that they look similar to are on a short leash, as they are some of the least important effects in the deck and are more included for density. There is almost certainly a future where their lookalikes end up here too. Some respectable ramp options that you all are very familiar with: Farseek, 3 Visits, and Nature's Lore, and really any other 2-mana ramp spell. Yes, they are very efficient, but they lack synergy. We can find plenty of ramp from creature-based sources that our entire strategy hinges on. There's no reason to take away opportunities from creatures for generically good cards. There are even a decent number of mana dorks that aren't on the list I could still go for. If you want to build effective decks with high synergy, it is very important to keep this in mind. It isn't chiseled in a stone tablet as a one solution fits all. It's a balancing act that you have to pick your battles with. For example, I included Swords to Plowshares in this deck rather than Solitude. Solitude is a creature that should have more synergy with my deck, right? Yes, but the efficiency I need in order to amass a proper engine and build towards my win condition can't support it in this circumstance. It's worth taking a small hit to synergy. You just can't take very many before your deck goes into a pile of disparate cards that don't really work together unless you draw right. Anyways, let's wrap up with a few tutors that got cut. Invasion of Ikoria and Worldly Tutor were at one point necessary for this deck, since it lacked critical mass of creatures that actually worked with our synergies. We quickly got those gaps plugged up throughout the same year Wylie was printed, and all is well. Invasion got way worse as well, since most of the survival creatures are humans. It still can get Seedborn Muse or Drumbellerer, which was its main purpose beforehand, but it certainly lacks the utility now that the deck has changed so much. That's it for the presentation. I appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the deck. If you're interested in trying it out, let me know what your results are, and don't forget to tell your moms who you got it from. Stay plugged into the channel for more deck techs and endless babbling. Take care of yourselves. Much love. I've been Blake, the Highlander Hipster.